I led them with cords of kindness, with the bands of love. And I became to them as one who eases the yoke on their jaws, and I bent down to them and fed them.
For those who've seen my post earlier, I was going to do a live video on the what's known as the Mazzaroth. That word's used one time in the King James Bible in the book of Job, chapter 38, verse 32. But I'm going to start off like this. Have you ever been asked, I know I have in the past, by atheists, people who don't believe that the Bible's true, and they try to point to seemingly contradictions in the Bible. And one of the ones they'll always speak of is the story of the wise men who came to Jesus after he was born, and the fact that they follow the stars, as in astrology, and the fact that the Bible itself clearly prohibits this. And they'll bring it up as in, well, if the Bible prohibits it, then why in this verse does it seem like it's condoning it? And I know for years I never could reconcile that, because I mean, it does seem as if in that passage in Matthew, I'll read it in just a second, it seems as if the Bible is condoning this. But if you have a deeper understanding of what's going on, it makes perfect sense. And that's what I'm going to try to answer in this video. I'm not going to go very deep with this, but for those of you who have never heard the term Mazzaroth, M-A-Z-Z-A-R-O-T-H, that's a Hebrew transliteration of the word. But I'm going to start off, and I'm going to just read this passage in Matthew where it speaks of the wise men. And first off, I know most of us, and I know me for years, have been taught the three wise men. Well, it doesn't actually say how many there were. It just says wise men. It says they had 3 gifts, but it doesn't say how many there were. Anyway, here's the passage. Matthew chapter 2. I'm going to just read this real quick. This is coming out of the ESV, English Standard Version. It says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler, who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly, and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, that I too may come and worship him. Okay, I'm going to just stop there. That's basically the story. And this is where, the Star of Bethlehem and all that. And, the Bible clearly prohibits astrology, or looking to the stars as a means of predicting the future. The most prominent passage that speaks of this is in Deuteronomy 18 verse 10, but I'm going to read this whole section starting at verse 9. Deuteronomy 18 starting at verse 9, it says, when you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. Verse 10, there shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God, for these nations which you are about to depossess listen to fortune tellers and diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do this. And that right there in verse 10 where it says interpret omens, tells fortunes and interpret omens. That's the way the ESV has it. And that's written slightly different in other translations, but basically that's what it's talking about. Now, if you read through the rest of the Old Testament, there's a lot of places where it says don't worship the stars and don't worship the angels and things like that. And that's what it's referring to, okay? So, for those who don't know out there, like, what's your sign and reading your daily horoscopes, that's against what the Bible says. It says we're not supposed to do that. But back to Matthew 2, it seems as if it's condoning it because these wise men, these magi, did that. And they followed the stars, and they knew when Jesus was going to be born, and they knew where he was going to be born. And how do you reconcile that? If the Bible says don't do it, but then it gives us a story of it, these people clearly doing it, seems like we have a problem there. An atheist will always bring that up in an argumentative fashion, trying to point out that the Bible contradicts itself. Well, like I said, I'm going to explain to you. And I'm in no way condoning astrology, okay? Like I said, the term is Mazzaroth, and I'm gonna read here. Let me get my King James Bible. Just a second. I should have did this beforehand, but I didn't. My King James Bible, because it's written differently in the ESV. I'll read it out of that too. But in the King James Bible, this is where the term's used. That's in Job 38, verse 32. Let me get there and I'll read it. Okay. Job 38, verse 32. Well, I'm going to read verse 31 and 32 because they both pertain to the stars. Verse 31, it says, can thou bind the sweet influence of the Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? Pleiades and Orion are both constellations in our sky. Okay, verse 32 says, can thou bring forth Mazzaroth in its season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Okay, now I'm going to look it up in the ESV, and I'll let you see the slight difference of how it's been translated. Because for those who know me know I don't read from just one translation. You can always get a better understanding if you read the same text in multiple translations. Job 38, 32. 38, 30. Okay, I'm going to just read 31 in this one. It says Mazzaroth in this too. It says, can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season, or can you guide the bear with its children? Okay. Basically what it is in the beginning, God, when he created everything, he wrote the story, the redemption story, in the stars. Okay. Whew. And And in ancient times, the people knew this, and they knew the story. What is it? Psalm 147, verse 4. It says, He determines the number of the stars, and He gives all of them their names. Now here's the thing. In ancient times, the people knew this, and they knew the story that the stars tell. But at the time of the Tower of Babel, which was created by Nimrod, he took this and he twisted it. Satan used him and twisted this. See, in ancient times, the stars and the way men looked at them and interpreted them, it was God-centered. But when Satan got a hold of it, like he does everything, he twists it, and he made it man-centered. See, to the Mazzaroth, it would tell the story of what God was going to do. But when it twisted into the Zodiac, which comes from an ancient Babylonian word, ancient Babylonian origins, he twisted it and made it God-centered, man-centered, as in the stars telling of man. Hence, you're being born under a certain sign at a certain time of the year, and you're going to be wealthy and famous and all this, and reading the sign. What's your horoscope? What's your sign? Okay. Now, here's the deal. I'm going to give you some passages out of the Bible that point to this. But because of this knowledge being lost through history, these passages that I'm going to point out to you, I guarantee, well, I ain't going to guarantee, I'm going to just say, more than likely you've never heard them with this interpreted the way I'm going to show you this. Why? It's because this knowledge has been lost and not many people know this. But if you go back to Genesis chapter 15, I'm going to show you something. It's very interesting. When I first found this out, it blew me away. It totally blew me away. And let's see, Genesis chapter 15. Like I said, I'm reading out of the ESV. You can read it out of any translation you want, but this is just the one I have right here with me. But Genesis chapter 15, this is what it says. Okay, let me give you a little background information. Like I said, okay, in Genesis chapter 10, we have the table of nations, which is basically after the flood. It talks about the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and all their descendants, and all the different people groups it had. Okay, well, if you read in verse 8, it says that Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on the earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Okay, that's the first place in the Bible that the word kingdom is used, and Nimrod being a king. Okay, with that in mind, like it says, the plains of Shinar. When you go to the next chapter, in chapter 11, it says this, verse 1. It says, Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as the people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar. There's your connection. It says, and in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. And they said to one another, Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had bricks for stone, and a bitumen for mortar, and bitumen for mortar. They said, Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in heaven, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed all over the face of the whole earth. Okay, basically what I'm getting at is this was the first kingdom on earth, and it was ruled by Nimrod, and he made a tower. Okay, this is when the twisting of all this information happened, when the God-centered Mazzaroth became the twisted man-centered Zodiac that we know today. Okay, well, if you go to the next chapter, this is where we're introduced to Abram. And God calls him out. I'm going to just read a couple of verses here. She'll just give you some context. Genesis 12, starting at verse 1. It says, Now the Lord said to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house into the land that I will show you. Okay, well, Abram lived in the plains of Shinar. He was a Chaldean, which is basically an ancient Babylonian for all intents and purposes. Slightly different people group, but basically it's the same thing. Okay, so keep that in mind. Abram came out of this land where Nimrod had done all this stuff. Okay, and like I said, you go over to chapter 15, and this is it right here. I'm gonna start at verse 1. I'm gonna read the first 6 verses. It says this. It said, After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. Verse 4. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. Verse 5. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and number the stars if you are able to number them. Then he said, So shall your offspring be. Verse 6. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Now, most of the time, when someone teaches this passage, they interpret it like this. That when God told Abraham to go outside and look at the stars, that he was saying, count them. The King James, let's read it out of the King James. I'm going to read this out of a couple of different translations so you can see this. But the King James, what is it, verse 5? Yes. Genesis 15, verse 5. Out of the King James has it like this. It says, and he, meaning God, and God brought him, Abraham. And God brought Abraham forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. Okay. Now, we remember back in chapter 12, this is when, like I said, it says, Now the Lord said to Abraham, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to a land I will show you. Verse 2, God says, And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Okay. So basically God is telling Abraham, you're going to have descendants. But when we get to verse 15, most people want to interpret this passage as basically God saying, okay, look up. You see all them stars? You can't count them all. That's how many descendants you're going to have. All right, I'm going to read it again. Let's read this out of a different. I'm going to get, where's it at? Oh, where's it at? Here it is right here. I'm going to read this verse out of a couple different translations so you can see. Now I know in the NIV, and I know people don't like the NIV or whatever. It don't matter. We're going to read it out of there. And I'm going to read it out of the New American Standard Version also, because I want people to see this. Genesis 15. I'm going to look it up in this other one too. Where's it at? Genesis 15. Genesis 15. Let me get it opened up to all these places. Okay, the New American Standard Bible has verse 5 like this. Genesis 15:5. It says, "And he took him outside and said, Now look to the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, So shall your offspring be. Then he," meaning Abraham, "then he believed in the Lord, and the Lord reckoned him as righteousness." Okay, the NIV has it written this way, verse 5. It says, "He took him outside and said, Look up to the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness." Now, when you read that, you think that it means like it's been interpreted and taught for thousands of years. God said, "Look at all the stars. You said, count them all. That's how many descendants you're going to have. Your seed will be that numerous." And Abraham believed him, and God counted it to him as righteousness. Now, the question I want to ask you is, what does the number of stars and Abraham believing that he's going to have a whole bunch of kids and descendants got to do with making him righteous? It just doesn't add up. Okay, now here's the deal. If you look up that word number or tell or count, like I said, I'm going to read it again. Yeah, let's just read it out of the NIV because it uses the word count. It says, "He took him outside and said, Look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." That word count is used twice there. That's where the confusion comes in. If we look up that word in our concordance, I've written this down. Let me make sure I'm going to look at it right. It's Strong's number H5608. And how do we pronounce it? Here we go.
Strong's H5608.
Sapphire. Cipher, basically. Okay. Now, the Strongs will define this word as such: to score with a mark as a tally or record, that is, to inscribe, and also to enumerate, intensely to recount. And then it goes on, it says count, declare, number, reckon, scribe, show forth, speak, talk, tell, writer. Okay, so and that word has been translated poorly in every one of these English Bibles. The ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible says this for that word. It says a recording of a story or number. it says this also, a document or record written on a sheet of skin or papyrus and rolled up. A counting, as a recording. A document or record. A counting as a recording. Okay. Now when it says count the stars, if you're able to count them, it would probably be a little bit better if they said recount the stars. Not as in 1, 2, 3 count, but recount as in tell a story. Recount the story that's in the stars. So what it is, and the Mazzaroth, in the beginning, God put, like I said, he put the story of man's redemption in the stars. And that's what God was saying to Abraham. Look up at the stars and tell the story. Recount the story that's written in the stars if you're able to. Now, why wouldn't he be able to? Because he came out of the land where it was twisted. And God was basically saying, do you remember the original story that was written in the stars? And what it speaks of? Well, the story, I'm not going to get into interpreting it all. You can do all that on your own. There's plenty of books. And I'm going to share all the links to a lot of these books that go into the explaining of all the stars and what all of them mean and everything. And you can see it. But basically what God was saying is, you know how the story that's written in the stars talks about a Redeemer that's going to come one day. Abraham's basically, yeah, he says, that Redeemer is going to be one of your descendants. That's what Abraham believed. And that's why it was credited to him as righteousness. Not the fact that he believed, oh, I'm going to have a whole bunch of descendants. No, the fact that one of your descendants is going to be the Redeemer. That's the part that he believed and credited into righteousness. And people will say, well, no, that's not what it means, because, no. Well, I'm going to point this out to you. What is it? In Genesis 22, 17, and Genesis 26, 4. I'm going to flip over here and I'm going to read these two. Genesis 22 is the story of the binding of Isaac. The Akedah. It's where God tells him to go up there and sacrifice him on the mountain, and at the last minute the angel of the Lord stopped him. He finds a ram or whatever. But verse 17 of that passage, this is after he stopped, and the angel of the Lord tells him not to kill Isaac. And verse 17, God speaking to Abram, he says, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sands on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gates of the enemy. See, that's where the fact of your descendants will be numerous comes from. And the same thing in chapter 26, verse 4, where it says, again, God speaking to Abram, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give your offspring all these lands. So he's saying he's going to have a lot of offspring. But people, why they read this information and they want to put it back into the context of Genesis 15, where it says count the stars. No. God was telling Abram in 15 that the Messiah, the Redeemer, would come through your descendants. That's what he's talking about. And when you learn what the story in the stars is, then you'll see it. And that's what he's telling him. Like I read in, I read it a second ago, didn't I? And Psalm 147:4, where it says he named all the stars. Here's a tidbit of information. You take a star in our culture, and we speak English, and whatever star, doesn't matter, you name one, and the name we go by, or the name we call it, and then you go to somewhere else in the world, and their culture, and their language, and the word for that same star you picked, the same star to them, it's going to have a different name. But here's the kicker. Even though it's two different words from two different languages, from two different cultures, both those words will mean the same thing. And it's like that pretty much across the board with all the stars. No matter what culture, no matter what language, and no matter what word that star is named, that specific star is going to have, the name of the star is going to have the same meaning across all the cultures. That right there should be an indication that man did not name the stars. That, like it says in Psalm 147:4, God named them. And it's those stars that tell a story. I'm going to point something else out to you. Now think of that. In ancient times, men knew this. But as I said, it's been lost to history. And it's been twisted. In ancient Babylon, it was twisted. Just like everything else was twisted in ancient Babylon. You know, you read through your Bible, you'll see it's the tale of two cities. Jerusalem, or Zion, the city of God, on one side, and Babylon, the city of Satan, on the other. But now, and this concept, this Mazzaroth concept, it's hinted at even in the New Testament. And I'm sure you've read this passage and you've never seen it, but I'm going to point something out to you. If you go to Romans here, I've got it bookmarked. If you go to Romans chapter 10, it says this. Now, everybody knows this passage. Romans 10:9. That's the one that says, because you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him to the dead, you will be saved. Verse 10. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. We all know that. But if you keep reading a little bit further, and you even get down to verse 17, faith comes by hearing, and hearing through the word of God, or through the words of Christ, depending on what translation you read. We all know this. But let's back up and let's just read this for a second. Let's truly listen to what it's saying. Paul, writing in verse 14, he says this. How then will they just in general, anybody, don't matter, just how will they? He says, how will they call on him in whom they have not believed? Basically, he's asking a question. He says, if you call on the name, like he just said, if you believe in your heart and you call on the name of Jesus, you'll be saved. Okay. Now he's going to ask a series of rhetorical questions, and he's making a point. He says, how then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? Meaning, if you ain't never heard of Jesus, how can you believe in his name, and how can you call on him if you've never heard of the man? Okay. And it goes on to say, and how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, now this is a quote from Isaiah, as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. But they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. So back, like I said, basically what he's saying is, how are the people going to believe in somebody they ain't never heard of? How they going to call on somebody? How they going to call on the name of Jesus if they ain't never heard of him? The only way is if someone goes and preaches to them and tells them the story. Makes sense. Just a bunch of rhetorical questions to get their minds thinking. And then verse 18, it says, I'm going to read 17 again now. It says, so faith comes by hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. Verse 18, but I ask, have they not heard? So he's asking all these questions. How can you believe in a name you never heard of? How can you call on a name you ain't never heard of? Somebody's got to preach to them. Somebody's got to tell them before they can know. And then he says that in verse 18. But I ask, have they not heard? Indeed, they have. For, and this is a quote, their voice has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. That's a quote from Psalm 19. Many of us know Psalm 19. Let's flip over there and read what it says. Psalm 19 has 14 verses altogether. The first 6 pertain to this one subject. Psalm 19, verse 1, it says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words, whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. There's that verse that Paul quoted. In them he has set a tent for the sun, whom comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. Well, let's go back and let's look at this again. And verse 2, day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words, whose voice is not heard. Okay, question. Verse 2 says that day to day it pours out speech. But in verse 3 says there is no speech, nor are there words. Well, how can it speak every day if there's no words and there is no speech? It's the message in the stars. That's what this is talking about. This whole section, these first 6 verses of Psalm 19 is talking about the Mazzaroth and the fact that the ancient people knew the story. The stars don't actually speak, but if you look up at them and you know the story, it reminds you God is going to redeem mankind. It's the story in the stars. That's what that's talking about. And that's what Paul was referring to in that series of questions in Romans, which when I first heard that, that blew my mind. But I ask, have they not heard? Indeed they have. And basically what he's saying when he says, how can they call on him who they have not believed? And how are they believed in whom they've not heard? He basically tells them, he says, you've heard, and all, but you just don't know yet what his name is, and the fact that he has came, he has been born, and he lived and died and rose again. That's what he's saying when he says that. But I ask, have they not heard? Yeah, they know the story. I've even heard testimonies of people, of missionaries going to, isolated parts of the world and sharing the gospel message to the indigenous people, and one of the elderly women of the tribe coming up after, the message was preached and all that, the elderly woman come up to the missionary after he presented the gospel to him, and she said, we all know this story, but we just never knew the person's name, who it was referring to. And the missionary was just amazed. And he's like, what do you mean you've heard this story? I'm the first missionary who's ever been here to tell you about Jesus. How did you know this story? And the elderly lady went, it's in the stars. See, that knowledge of the Mazzaroth had been passed down, and it remained intact and untainted and untwisted in that group of people. Now, I've heard that type of testimony from, a few different missionaries or whatever that understand this concept. But that blew me away. That right there is what actually got me, to go, okay, maybe there is something to this. Because me, probably like many of you out there, when someone starts talking about this, first thing you do is you set up a stronghold, a wall, and you're like, no, this is astrology, this is wrong, I can't have nothing to do with it. Well, back then, it was God-centered, not man-centered as it is today. Now here's the question. Let's see. I got all kind of notes. I got all kind of notes over here of things. Let me see. I was going to say this. Here's your one right here. Excuse me. I got the hiccups. Here's a question. Okay. Let's go back to Matthew. Where's it at? Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. It says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, on the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Okay. Wise men from the east. What's east of Jerusalem? That would be Babylon, Persia, Babylonian Empire. That geographical location where all that was. Okay, now you're going to be, question you should be asking yourself was, well, how did these people know the story and the story? How did they know any of this? Well, if you track back history and you realize that Daniel had been in the time of the southern kingdom of Judah's exile, and when they were taken captive into Babylon for 70 years, that Daniel, being as he interpreted the dreams for the king Nebuchadnezzar and all that, and he was eventually, according to, I think it's Daniel 2:48. Let me look it up and just make sure. Daniel 2:48. He was put in charge of the wise men, or the magicians, or the prognosticators, whatever term you want to apply to it. Let's see, 2:48. Yeah, I'm going to start at Daniel 2. I'm going to start at verse 46. It says, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face. This is after Daniel interpreted the king's dream about, if I'm not mistaken, this is the one about the statue, the gold head, and the different metals in the different parts of the body. But like I said, verse 46, it says, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, truly your God is God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery, meaning the mystery in his dreams. Verse 48. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. At that time, Daniel was made the chief out of all the wise men, the magi, the magicians, the sorcerers, whatever. He was put in charge of all those people. So don't you think that either Daniel knew the story written in the stars and he passed it on to the people underneath him, and then it was passed on from generation to generation to generation until the time of the birth of Christ, and those magi, those wise men, could see it? Or the fact that when Daniel was put in charge, it comes down to this: either he already knew this information written in the stars and he shared it with these people, or through studying and learning and being with these people, he discerned it and he figured all this out. It doesn't matter. But that's how the three wise men, or the magi's from the east, knew. It's because of Daniel and his relation, and him being, one of God's people, one of the Israelites, or one of the Judeas. And that's how he knew. And that's how they knew generations later when Jesus was actually born. Kind of blows your mind when you stop and think about it. Let's see. I'll throw this out there. I'm going to kind of wrap up, I guess, with that. But I'm going to throw out a couple of other little things for you. Like I said, Mazzaroth. It's Strong's number H. Yeah, let's look that up. Let's look that up. It's excuse me. I'm gonna look that up. Let's see. Like I said, it's used in Job 38:32. Yeah, it's Strong's H4216. And according to the Strong's, it basically defines it as the 12 signs of the Zodiac and the 36 associated constellations. It's the whole thing. If you look in some other English translations, that word is translated as constellation. But I looked it up, and this was the definition I come across, and I like this. It was defined, meaning the actual Hebrew word itself means a garland of crowns. Let's see if let me look this. Let me look this up real fast. I should have did this before, but I didn't think about it. I was trying to gather all this information down and try to put it in some sort of way to make it, to present it so it would make sense. Job 38:32. Yeah, that's the only place in the entire King James Bible that it's used. And I was going to look in this Hebrew lexicon, Hebrew dictionary, to see if it defines it, but it doesn't, obviously, probably because it's only used one time. But I found it, I looked on the internet, and that's the definition. This is what it says that the word literally means in Hebrew. The literal translation is a garland of crowns. Okay. Now here's something. Now this, I don't know if I believe this or not, or if I can buy into this one, but I'll put it out there. And some people believe that Ezekiel's will that's mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 1 and Ezekiel chapter 2, where it speaks of the wheels within wheels and eyes all around and all that, that's what it's talking about. Some people believe that what Ezekiel saw was the Mazzaroth when he was lifted up and he had the vision of the throne room of God, that he was given the understanding of all this. The book of Enoch refers to these things. Yeah. I'm going to throw this out there too. This one, something in some of the stuff in the past that I've read and studied about this information, they said this. Now this kind of makes sense. Now, I'm not saying I believe this, but I'm going to just present the information that I've heard. You know, like I said, this video is just the basic information. So I'm not going to get too deep in it or anything. It's kind of a starting point, a launching pad for anybody who wants to study it further. But I heard it presented this information that, you know, it could be said that Abraham, when, back to Genesis 15, when God says, you know, go outside and count the stars, or retell the story that's in the stars, and your offspring's going to be that. Meaning, you know, the stars point to the Redeemer, point to the Messiah, and God says that Messiah is going to come through your seed. And Abraham believed it, and it was counted as righteousness. Okay, now with that thought, it could be believed that Abraham thought that his direct descendant Isaac was going to be that Redeemer. Ooh, that sounds crazy, don't it? But remember, what's it say in Hebrews? Hebrews chapter 11. Let's flip over there and read what it says. Hebrews chapter 11, what most of us know is referred to as the hall of faith, or the chapter of faith. It's the one where it goes through and it tells about all these people and all these things they've done. Okay, Abraham is mentioned a few times in this chapter. He's mentioned in verse 8. But if you go down to verse 17 right here, verse 17, it says this. It says, and by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promise was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Meaning, through Isaac, the Messiah would come. It says, of whom it was said, through Isaac your offspring shall be. Verse 19. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. It's basically this. If Abram didn't have any kids, and God, in those verses I mentioned, on Genesis 22:17 and Genesis 26:4, where God told Abraham, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars. Well, if that's the case, and the only offspring Abraham had at the time, blood offspring, we're not counting Ishmael, only blood offspring he had at the time and that he ever did have was Isaac. So if Abraham knew that he was going to have a whole bunch of descendants and they were going to have to come through Isaac, that if he obeyed God and went up there and killed Isaac, then guess what? That wouldn't be Abraham's problem. That would be God's problem, and God would have to turn around and raise Isaac from the dead, because God had said through your seed will come all these descendants and the Messiah. So if Abram killed the only descendant he had, then God was going to have to raise him back from the dead. But some people believe, and the case could be made that Abraham actually may have. Now, I'm not saying he did, I'm not saying he didn't, but you could, if you look at it, maybe Abraham thought that Isaac was that Messiah. I don't know. It's just a what if, a possibility. I don't know. I've often pondered that, though. Did Abraham think that Isaac was going to be that Messiah? Don't know. It's an interesting thought, though. I'm gonna talk on this for a second. Now, this right here, I don't know. I've heard a lot of people speak on this, and I've read a lot of information on this. And I'm gonna throw this out there just for you guys. Like I said, this is just kind of a basic introduction to this topic and this subject. If you want, you can dig into this further, and you can explore this tangent of this concept if you want. But okay. Like I said, that the Mazzaroth and the wheels of Ezekiel. Okay, if you look up, there's 12 major constellations in the Mazzaroth, the Zodiac, whatever. I don't like using the term Zodiac because it has such a negative connotation. But there's 12 constellations in the Mazzaroth. Okay, and they tell a story. And like I said, this information has been lost through antiquity, through history. And, yeah, I got to read this. Oh, where's it at? It's the book of Daniel. Where is it? Daniel. I think it's Daniel 12 where it speaks of this. Yes. Okay, yeah. Right here. This just kind of goes into this concept. Let me just read this and I'll explain what I'm talking about in a second. And it'll kind of, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if I believe all this what I'm about to share with you or not. I'm going to just present the information to you. You can decide for yourself. But Daniel chapter 12, verse 13, again, like I said, I'm reading out of the ESV. Verse 3, chapter 12, verse 3. Chapter 12, verse 3. Make sure I got that right. It says, and those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. See, I was talking about the stars. But verse 4, it says, but you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the end of time. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Some people I've heard say that this knowledge of the Mazzaroth, not that that's specifically what it's talking about here, no, but that this knowledge of the Mazzaroth was known then, and it was basically that it was going to be lost. But in the end times, this information was going to come back to man. It was going to be quote unquote, revealed to man again, I guess. And they were going to have the understanding of this. People will point to, what is it, Zephaniah 3? I think it's Zephaniah 3. Let's see. Let me look it up and make sure I read it to you. Zephaniah chapter 3, if I can find Zephaniah, Zechariah, Malachi. Here we go. Zephaniah 3, verses... verse 8. It says this. Verses 8 and 9. It says, "Therefore wait for me, declares the Lord, for the day when I rise up to seize the prey. For my decision is to gather the nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out upon them my indignation, all my burning anger." This is about the end times and the judgment at the very end. That's what the context of this is talking about. It says, "For my decision is to gather the nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out upon them my indignation, all my burning anger. For in the fire of my jealousy all the earth shall be consumed." Okay, verse 9. It says, "For at that time I will change the speech of the peoples to pour out to a pure speech." Let me read that again. "For at that time I will change the speech of the peoples to a pure speech, that all of them may call upon the name of the Lord and serve him with one accord." I've heard people point to this verse, and basically what they're getting at is that this knowledge that was lost in the past, in the end times, will be brought forth again. And the simple fact that the first book I know of that talks about the Mazzaroth and the knowledge thereof was, I'm not saying the first book I know of, but the first book, the oldest book, was in like the late 1800s. I'm going to share a link to this in the comments. It's a book called The Witness of the Stars by E.W. Bullinger. A lot of you may have heard of him. Its copyright date is like the mid or the late 1800s. This was another book. It's called The Gospel in the Stars by Joseph Seiss. I don't know how you say it. Seiss. I'm going to share a link to that one also. And there's a book I'm reading right now on the subject. I can share you a link to Amazon where you can buy it, but I don't have a digital copy of this. Those first two, we've got digital copies, and I'm going to share a link to where you can download it and read it for yourself if you like. But this other one is by E. Raymond Captain. It's called The Glory of the Stars, a study of the Zodiac. Here's actually the book I'm talking about. I've been reading through this one. This one, he connects the Mazzaroth to the book of Enoch and Ezekiel and the vision of the wheels within wheels and all that. But there's that. But anyway, back to this concept that it was lost and it's going to be refound in the end times. This knowledge of the Mazzaroth and the story and all that being revealed, I guess, to mankind in the end times. There's a verse also that people point to. It's in Isaiah. Here, I got this bookmark too, I think. Yeah, Isaiah 19:19. And this is interesting right here. I did look this up and verify this, what I'm going to tell you. That's true. Yes, Isaiah 19:19. It says this. And this is, let's see. It just says this. It says, "In that day, there will be an altar to the Lord in the middle of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border." Okay. If you basically look at the borders of Egypt on a map today, it's pretty much a square. And if you look to where the Great Pyramid of Giza on the Giza Plateau is, and the Sphinx is, It's not on the border like this says, like it says. It says, in that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. Well, if you look at a map today where the Giza Plateau and the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx is, it's not near the border. What I'm getting at is people will say that the pyramid and the Sphinx is this altar and this pillar, basically. But it says in the midst. Well, they are in the midst of Egypt, but neither one of them are on the border. Well, in ancient times, this is the part I said that I looked up and I verified it. That in ancient times, Egypt was like considered two countries, and the border went right through where the Giza Plateau is. So at the time, like when this was written down, yeah, they were on the border. And the reason I'm pointing this out is think about it like this. If you've got a circle, like the Mazzaroth is a circle, 12 constellations, and they're going to tell a story, wouldn't you need to know where to start and where to end? Meaning which constellation and set of stars to start telling the story and which one's going to end the story? And people will point to this verse and then the Sphinx. And that was the key. Now, I'm going to get off into some stuff. Like I say, you know, I read a lot of things. I read a lot of stuff other than the Bible. But like I say, you know, out of the Bible, believe it. But some of the stuff out of like the Book of Enoch and all these extra canonical books, you know, pseudo-epigraphal books, you use them as good information. If they line up with the Bible, that's great. If they don't line up with the Bible, then it ain't true. But they point to this, and some of these things I've read basically say that the pyramid and or the Sphinx were built by Enoch. I always thought that was kind of strange. Maybe he did. I don't know. I don't know. Bible doesn't mention anything about that. So, you know, I don't have anything to say it's true or it's not true. But there are legends and there's things like that that say that Enoch was responsible for all that. I mean, you can even watch some of these shows and they're on the History Channel when they talk about the Great Pyramids. Or you can watch these YouTube videos and people will point to the fact that they believe that the pyramid was built by Enoch. Or, you know, I ain't going to say he built it by his own hands, but, you know, he was the mastermind, the architect behind it all. But, anyway, here, this simple fact right here may lead credence to that. The fact that the circle, the constellations, and they telling a story, well, if they tell a story, you got to know which constellation to start with, to start the story, which one to end with. Well, if you look at the Sphinx, it's, you know, we've always been told that it's like the face of a man and the backside is of a lion. Well, maybe it's the face of a woman, Virgo, the constellation, and the backside is Leo, the constellation. Meaning you start telling the story in the constellation of Virgo and you end telling the story in the constellation of Leo. Now, maybe, maybe not. Well, I know that when you tell the story, like this book that I'm reading right here, he's breaking, I haven't read it all, but he breaks the stars down and the constellations into, like, I want to say, in groups of three. These three constellations, they tell a story about this, and then the next three tell a story. But if you take each of the stories together, they all combine to tell one big story. And that's the way the guy in this book presents the information. Well, you know, like I said, I don't know. I mean, this is all speculation and, you know, theories and stuff like that. But it's interesting to read. let's see, what else have I got down over here that I would mention maybe. That's about it, really. Like I said, that's about it. You know, I wasn't gonna go in too deep, but that's just something to think about. But I will say this, I do believe that Genesis 15 it's not talking about the number of the stars. It's God saying, tell me the story in the stars, if you can. Well, why wouldn't he be able to? It's because it come out of the land that twisted it. And God was basically saying, you know who the stars is talking about? That's who your descendants is going to be. That Redeemer that the stars speak of is going to come through your line, your genealogy, your ancestry. That I believe. Oh yes, most definitely I believe that. But like I said, this wasn't going to be very deep of a study. I probably gave y'all some information they ain't never heard, blew their mind. Somebody out there right now is probably wanting to burn a stake, calling me a heretic because I'm, oh my God, he believes in astrology. Nope. Like I said, it was God-centered. Satan twisted it and made it man-centered, like he did everything else pretty much at the time of Babylon.
Like and share our videos. Comment below, good or bad. Give us ideas for new videos. But above all, pray for us and subscribe to the channel. It'll be a little circle icon with a cow's face on the bottom right hand of the screen. And with that, I say shalom, and don't just read your Bibles, but study them.